The first step to an effective solid waste management program, an integrated solid waste management program, is waste stream characterization. And what stream characterization essentially entails is literally going through the trash and determining what are the types, sources of waste, amounts, and the characteristics. So there's a number of ways that you can do a waste stream characterization. You can do volunteer programs with households where you take a sampling of households within a community or certain areas. So some of the sources, if you have residential or various communities. You can also do a sampling of businesses, industries, institutions. Those are the types of generators you would usually look at, and so you'd want to get a waste stream characterization from each of those types of waste generators: residences, businesses, industries, and institutions. So once you have a general idea of the generators and you have a sampling of that, you need to go through and literally separate the trash into different types. Household, commercial, industry, figure out the sources. Then you have to determine what's recyclable, what's not recyclable, whether you're dealing with green waste, paper, aluminum cans, glass, etc. You can do a high-level waste stream characterization, so you're sorting every single component, or depending on where you are in your planning, whether or not you want to just start small, you could focus on what you suspect you'd have the most of. So anything that's potentially recyclable, instead of cycling out both glass, aluminum, and paper, just take all the recyclables out, and then you know how much is recyclable, how much is not, and then from the recyclable batch you can determine what you have the most of if you just want to focus on one recyclable versus doing multiple ones. In addition to the general municipal solid waste, you have to look at possible bulky goods. So we saw in the video there was a separation of bulky goods like refrigerators. Those are also called white goods. You also have issues with furniture and appliances. There's multiple ways to deal with those large bulky items, and usually the types of things that are offered or you can look into is a house-to-house collection, maybe once a year, or at the option of residences. Having a scheduled house-to-house collection is actually a lot simpler and more efficient because you know exactly when you're going to need a larger truck and a larger crew to deal with it, and you don't have to deal with an at-will collection. So whenever a tribal member wants to get something, you can. If you also keep an eye on your waste stream and calculate when you're getting larger items that aren't supposed to be at a pickup, you can start to get an idea of when roughly people put out their larger items, usually around spring or Christmas or the holidays, different varying times when people bring larger items in, and so they get rid of the older stuff. Another bulky good option is a permanent transfer station where you actually have a place where people can drop off the bulkier items, and then those can be collected and sorted out as necessary and taken to landfills as necessary. As I mentioned, you could have a scheduled dumpster or an a will call collection, which is as soon as you have it, you come and get it. Another issue we see a lot of is substreams of municipal solid waste is actually automobiles. And there's a couple ways to deal with that. You can have auto dismantlers. You can develop a business or a relationship with local businesses that actually will dismantle automobiles, and or relationships with junkyards. There are some DMV junking requirements, so remember the intent is to get this stuff off the tribal lands, so as soon as you enter the state jurisdiction, you're going to have to be compliant with their requirements. So if you're junking a bunch of cars and moving them off reservation, you're going to have to make sure that you're compliant with the state's DMV junking requirements. Another substream that's overlooked is farm chemical in containers, and this is because of the amount of agricultural practices that are on tribal lands. After the Allotment Act, the intent was to bring agriculture to tribal lands, and so there's a lot of non-Indians that live on tribal lands that have farms, as well as tribal people who actually have farms. As a result, they have those farm chemicals, which are very hazardous and in sometimes large amounts. So you need to make sure that you have ways of addressing drop-offs of these chemicals and practice proper disposal. We'll talk a little bit more about this during the hazardous waste section, but it's definitely something to be conscious of in your waste stream characterization and determining where you're going to put trash and how you're going to address it. So once you've done a waste stream analysis or characterization, what you need to do with that data is determine how you're going to process and collect your waste. So as we saw in the video, there are multiple options. The video described predominantly a curbside collection option. Now, curbside collection option is the most effective to preventing open dumping. It's convenient. It's simple to implement. Once people get used to curbside, they really follow through with it. But as things that are usually convenient, it's also more expensive. The other options are green boxes, which are usually like convenience centers where people can go and drop off their trash at these boxes. It's not a transfer station, but a location where you have the boxes and people can dump their trash there versus at an open dump. Sometimes when you're staging a green box, one thing to consider is to putting it near an open dump because people are already accustomed to going to that area for their trash disposal needs. And those are just green boxes that are unattended. One level above that would be staffed convenience centers. So those would be areas where you have people on staff to watch what's being dumped, make sure that there's no vandalism or anything occurring there. And from there is a transfer station. Now, the difference between a staffed convenience center and a transfer station, and we'll show you a couple pictures from Tule River of their transfer station, is that a transfer station's intent is to actually collect large amounts of trash and then easily transport them into larger trucks. So usually what happens is you have a drop-off for smaller trucks that do the collection either by picking up the green boxes and or bringing in the curbside collection trash, putting that together and combining it into a larger load that goes farther off reservation or farther away to the landfill. So really the intent is to have a less amount of trucks traveling to landfills. And this is really important for tribes with larger land bases where they've got multiple communities spread out over a large area, and it's more cost effective to find a central location for a transfer station, collect all the trash that's been brought in from the reservation, and then do one larger truck off to the landfill. It reduces costs both in gas, wear and tear on vehicles. You're not sending multiple vehicles to a longer distance, as well as staff time. You only need 1 or 2 drivers to take that one larger truck to the landfill versus having all your drivers go from curbside or green boxes or convenience centers within the tribal communities off to the landfills. And then of course there's always the collection option of the landfill. It's very difficult usually for tribal members to take their items to a landfill unless one is nearby. So really it's something that the tribal government will usually take over that responsibility if they want to prevent open dumping. So another thing to take into consideration with your collection options is how you're going to be processing the waste. Are you going to be recycling? Are you going to be removing items or composting items? It makes a huge difference in the collection options you choose because you'll be able to limit or reduce or more efficiently use the staff time you have. For example, if you have a green box and you want to do recyclables, you'll have an issue where people are going to be dropping off whatever they want in those green boxes. They may not be recycling appropriately, so you'll need to have another mechanism to go through the green box trash and remove any recyclables before they're taken to the landfill. And you can do that at a transfer station or other means, but if you take the green boxes straight to the landfill without an additional element or additional phase, you could be charged by the landfills depending on what their policies are. A lot of landfills these days are charging extra or charging fees for dumpsters or landfill drop-offs that contain compostable material or recycling because it decreases the lifespan of their landfills, so they're charging folks more to ensure that they actually do that filtering of items that go to the landfill. So that type of process is something you have to take into consideration with your collection options. If you're not going to have the ability to go through the green boxes or you have no way of processing it, you may want to look into providing recyclable boxes at a convenience center as well, and maybe consider spending that extra money for a staffed convenience center so that you can ensure that people are using the recyclable items appropriately. So first, conduct a needs assessment. The tribe must address what are the problems that the tribe is facing when it comes to solid waste disposal. Who is dumping on the territory and when? How, why, etc. Do they get away with it? Another thing is to figure out what are the goals of the tribe's response to illegal dumping. Do they want to eliminate dumping completely, reduce dumping, or make people accountable for dumping? And under the Open Lands Dump Act and under RCRA, the intent is to
completely eliminate dumping. However, the tribe may want to take a more staged approach. They may not want to be as aggressive as other tribes. There's a huge difference in the way tribes want to address activities that are not appropriate or inconsistent with what the community should be focusing on. So, example, in some communities, there's a very strict approach to open dumping. The tribal solid waste department is closely linked with their court system, and they quickly run open dumpers through the system where they are charged, they're fined, and they go through a punishment, either assessment of a fine or community service for open dumping. In other communities, that type of strict approach is not consistent with traditional practices. So what they do is they offer people the opportunity to clean up the dump before they bring charges. So they give them this opportunity to clean it up, and then they put them through an educational provision as part of their punishment where they learn why the open dumping is a problem and why it affects the community. Either way, there needs to be a general understanding by the tribe and the tribal council of what they want to achieve in that. There also needs to be a clear understanding of the budget allocated to any action to address illegal dumping. Are there funds left, or is there a need to seek funding from federal agencies to address open dumping? And really what people don't realize is the high cost. If they're not in the solid waste department, they don't realize the high cost to clean up open dumps and prevent open dumping. So there definitely are some costs associated, and because there might not be a recognition within the community or the tribal council on the service being provided to the community, it's really hard to ensure that those dollars are allocated appropriately. So an important thing for any solid waste management program is to really document the costs associated with your cleanup of open dumps, your solid waste disposal techniques, the education, and the costs that the organization needs to go through. Another thing to remind tribal councils and tribal communities is the fact that sovereign immunity does not exist when it comes to Resource Conservation Recovery Act. Tribes are capable of being held liable for open dumps within their reservation boundaries. So it's really important to remind community members of that fact, that they are responsible, and it can come out of the tribal council's general fund, it can come out of the tribe to clean up those sites when an alternative, a much less expensive alternative, is easily developed. And that would be not open dumping and taking your items to a green box, or paying for door-to-door service, or supporting the tribe paying for door-to-door service, whatever works best for the community. So next we're going to be looking at the Tule River tribe. They looked at community education. For example, they really focused on community education, awareness of waste reduction issues, measures, the environmental facts. They also really incorporated community praise and encouragement with photos and names of individuals that really were taking an act to clean up the community. So, for example, they had a running tally of open dumps that were cleaned up. They have photos of community members contributing to that. They have the Tule River eco-ethic. They really provided information and education about the hazards of barrel burning, backyard burning, or the way that waste reduction can contribute to the tribe, both reducing the cost to the community as well as helping the environment. So they really focused on educating the community on the environmental concerns.